Hey everyone, welcome to Capital Consumption Theory. I'm here today with Brian Winters, and today we're going to talk a little bit about um, problems of the standard theory. So, what are the problems of standard economic theory that would make something like capital consumption theory even necessary? What is it that standard economists are missing, or what do they have wrong that really even necessitates us to come up with a better theory to explain. So I think one of the things that comes to mind. So if you go back to the standard ideas right now are basically Keynesian, and the Keynesian idea is basically that aggregate demand is not self-regulating, that it can sort of fall short. Um, and one of the ideas that Keynes popularized was the paradox of thrift. And um, even up until today, most economists, when they talk about recessions or downturns, um, they sort of have the paradox of thrift in mind. So the paradox of thrift, um, it's very briefly, is the idea that when you have multiple agents in the economy and they're all spending, um, everybody's income is somebody else's spending. So if people begin to be worried about the future and they begin to save instead of spend, when they are saving, they're also reducing somebody else's income. And so the paradox of thrift, the idea is that when everybody tries to save, nobody can save. And instead of saving, what happens at an aggregate level is that everybody's income just goes down because spending has gone down. So that's the standard idea, and I think it is basically correct for recessions, but there is something mm, that it misses and that it sort of misdiagnoses. And so if we continue from this idea that we need to manage demand, and the ways that we do it are monetary policy and fiscal policy. So when we have a downturn, then we kind of turn up fiscal policy. The government borrows and spends, and we turn up monetary policy. We stimulate with monetary policy, meaning the Fed, buys debt on the debt market to reduce interest rates using newly created money of the Federal Reserve. That's the standard idea. But there's something very interesting going on in the last 10 years, or even 20 years, which is that, the fiscal policy and the monetary policy, um, it sort of keeps getting ratcheted up higher and higher. And if you go back, the monetary policy, it actually, that trend actually goes backwards to the 1970s. So ever since the 1970s, for the last 40 or 50 years, every time you have a recession, then you take the interest rates down, then you recover from the recession, the interest rates go back up, but they never come back to as high as they were before the recession. And so that trend goes from the 1970s with high, 10 to 20% interest rates, and the long-term trend just keeps going down to the present day, and we're at the zero low bound. And fiscal policy is doing the same thing. With I remember back in the 90s in the Clinton era, we actually had a balanced budget for a little while. And for a little while, I think there were some optimistic projections that we would even be able to pay off most of the debt if things kept on going that way. Um, then we got Bush, we got the Iraq, we got the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and we got lots of deficits. So the deficits came back up, but they've kept going higher. And in 2017 under Trump, the deficits, Trump brought the deficits all the way up to 1 trillion even before the recession hit. So during a time when we had been out of recession for 7 or 8 years, theoretically the economy was supposed to be going strong, but Trump already did 1 trillion in deficits in the absence of recession. And now that we have a recession, then those deficits keep going up. So you have this picture where monetary policy and fiscal policy keep getting ratcheted up. The idea, again, if you're thinking about this in terms of, paradox of thrift, the idea is that during the recession, everybody's scared. So you stimulate, you get the economy going back up, and then confidence recovers. And then once confidence recovers, then the economy is supposed to recover. And you're actually supposed to be able to reverse a little bit of that policy. You're supposed to be able to, reverse a little bit of that debt and deficit and bring the interest rates back up. And that is just something that, has not been happening. I compared a little bit to like, if the economy is a car, and you push the gas down every time you get to a recession, but the recession is over, and then you bring it back up, but it never comes back up, and it just keeps getting lower and lower and lower. You need to step back and figure out why that's happening, what's actually going on. So capital consumption theory sort of is an answer to that. And the answer is that, that beyond the paradox of thrift and the confidence, which do have a lot to do with recessions, there's also like a longer term structural phenomenon where it is the same loop operating, but it's on a longer term basis. So the loop is, spending, goes to businesses, and then businesses have to pay workers, so that becomes wages, and then workers have wages, so that then they can spend more. So in the paradox of thrift, it's also like a feedback loop, a positive feedback loop where, spending decreases, causes wages to decrease because businesses lay off workers. So that generates a positive feedback loop. But that's a short-term one based on confidence. And there's actually a longer, so CCT says that there's a longer term feedback loop that is more structural. And the thing is that, with productivity growth sort of slowly reducing labor demand relative to your economy, you end up in a situation where wages stagnate, and the stagnant wages causes spending to sort of stagnate also relative to the capacity of the economy. And that's a long-term thing. It's not about people having income and being afraid to spend it. It's about people not having the income in the first place, and so they can't spend it. And if you look at data, the bottom 50 to 80% of Americans, do not save any money. Basically, they already spend all the money that they bring in. They cannot, spend any more than what they're bringing in. They have no savings, and so that's a structural thing. That's a stagnant spending and wages loop. And you might ask, how can you tell that is happening? And the way that you can tell that is happening is you have to look at the capacity of the economy. You have to look at what the economy could be producing versus what it is actually producing based on actual spending. And the measure that does that is capacity utilization, which is put out by the Federal Reserve. So if you look at capacity utilization from the 1970s to the current time, it also has that long-term downwards trend. It peaks around 90% in the 70s, and that is maybe a little bit high, and it causes some capacity constraints, inflation. But then from there, it just keeps going down, and we're now at around 70%, which is a similar level to where we were in the Great Depression, which was also sort of a similar part of the cycle and facing similar conditions with high wealth inequality, and people at the bottom of the economy not having enough income to spend, and so the economy eventually running into trouble as a result. Yeah. Yeah, so that is, so to bring it back to, the problems of standard theory, the main problem of standard theory is that is that standard theory is sort of has a bit of sort of a it has a sort of a short term, like it's sort of too narrow in that it only looks at chains. Um, and so it's sort of successful in explaining a recession, and then you put in you act based on standard theory, you do the monetary policy and fiscal policy, and that works to get out of a recession. But there's something longer term that is not working and is resulting in both of those policy levers being sort of maxed out right now. And standard theory has no explanation for why that is, for why we would be unable to get off the zero load bound, why we keep drifting towards the zero load bound, and why we cannot get off of it, despite even having larger and larger fiscal deficits. Yeah, so that's what I had to say. Brian, do you have any comments or questions? Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's all for today. We have a short capital consumption theory today. I'm on vacation actually, here in beautiful Hainan.
Looks nice.
So hope you all enjoyed that, and I will see you guys in a couple of weeks. Yeah.